So tonight's presentation is Advocacy 101. And next slide.
Should be going.
Yeah.
Make sure my mouse is working right.
Okay. There we go. So what I really want to say is advocacy begins long before you have an external concern, long before there's a problem. The things that you can do to help advocacy in the very beginning are have some things in place. And if you're the person with lived experience, and Amy was just saying she's doing RAP training, the Wellness Recovery Action Plan, having one of those ready, or having a declaration for mental health treatment that is a booklet that is given out by the state Department of Mental Health, filling those out. And you want to fill those out when you are doing well, if you're the person with lived experience, when you're doing well, if you and whoever your significant other is that you choose to assist you at times when you're not doing as well, when you can't speak for yourself. And so you want to make sure that, and if you can do it with a mental health professional that works with you, that's helpful too. But there's things in each of these programs that identify what your preferences are. And in addition to what your preferences may be, what medications are good for you? What are you allergic to? What have you had a bad reaction to? What triggers you? So start doing these things ahead of time. It's important. It can be helpful when you do have a crisis or you do need advocacy. Next slide, please. So your best tools for advocacy: record keeping, document. Um, get yourself a spiral bound book or a binder or something that is, where you keep everything in one place. And, some people like to have dividers for maybe hospitalizations, the psychiatrist may be separate from the social worker. When we were working with my sister, and even now as the NAMI executive director, I have a book that every day, whoever I talk to, the date I talked to them, what the basic topic area was about, who I talked to, what their phone number was, anything pertinent to advocacy. I can go back and see who I talked to and when I talked to them. And I'm going to encourage you to make sure that you got medication, what the dosage is, how it's supposed to be taken, because we all know it doesn't always get taken that way, when and how it's supposed to be taken, um, and any changes in medication. Your system knowledge is a great tool for advocacy, and that may not be something you have right now, but you gain that as you go. You put it in this book. System knowledge. If you are in the hospital, or someone you love is in the hospital, um, each hospital, each system is different, and systems do include the jail. What are the visiting times? What can be brought in? What cannot be brought in? Given the circumstance, just learning about, who to go to, and when to go and what happens upon discharge. Another tool for advocacy is your attitude. It's going to be really important, especially on those days you're super stressed and your patience is worn really, really thin. I want you to take a breath, because your attitude, what mama always say, you can get more flies with honey. You don't need to be, totally honey, but you do need to be, respectful. The people that you're dealing in the systems, they're overwhelmed too. They're tired. Sometimes they have a bad day. Now, I'm not excusing things. I'm just saying a little consideration can go a long way and can be greatly appreciated and can definitely help to wax the wheels, and build relationships. They go a long way. In my role as the executive director, I have relationships at all the major hospitals in the immediate Middle Tennessee area, um, and I have people I can call on for what I like to call a teaching moment. When I call them and say, I'm wearing my advocacy hat and I have a teaching moment, that means I think there's a cause for legitimate concern and we need to chat. And they've gotten to know me and they know I don't call for nothing. So usually the response I get is, what do you got? And so I appreciate that. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we in place is admissions, whether they're voluntary or involuntary, arrest or crisis response, and hospitalization and discharge. Those are the most common times when we're looking at advocacy. Next slide, please. So an involuntary admission, if you're the person on the lived experience side, if you're the one having a hard time and you're being pulled in on an involuntary, there isn't a whole lot. There is a powerlessness that you feel. You may have felt that just because of your situation and the way your illness may have gotten control. And that is a hard place to be. That is a very hard place to be. But you may not have a lot of choice. But if you've completed RAP or done the other document we were talking about, and you've identified someone to act as your advocate, that person can share medication, allergies, docs, other info. That's the benefit of being prepared. We know that mental health issues are chronic. Just like other chronic disease, they don't go in a straight line. They're not going away. Sometimes we can keep them well managed for years, but occasionally you might take a dip. And this is when you want to make sure you've got something in place that's going to help you. If you are held past as a person of lived experience, if you're on an involuntary hold and you're held past 72 hours, you should have a hearing at the hospital. In fact, you're required to have a hearing. And when I say hospital, I'm talking broadly because we have several hospitals, but most of the major psychiatric hospitals actually have a hearing room, and they'll do a tele hearing with the judge. Sometimes a judge will come to the facility, but there should be a hearing. Next, please. So involuntary admission from the family caregiver side, you want to make sure that you've got a list that includes the full name of your loved one, a social security number, a Medicare or an insurance card, the psych practitioner names, and that could be a therapist and a psychiatrist or a licensed nurse practitioner, a social worker, whoever's key to maintaining your health. The primary care physician can be helpful to have. Allergies are good. Medications and triggers. What sets you off? Do you have PTSD? Have you had a bad, if you get in a car accident and it's not the car accident that gives you a hard time and messes you up, it's the fact that you see a policeman coming because maybe you've got a bad experience. And so that is really nice for family members to be able to relate. So next slide, please. So HIPAA, uh, Health Information Privacy, I believe, and Portability Act. The release of information may seem contradictory at times. If you're the person in crisis, you may not want your info shared with somebody else. If you are given a choice and you say, and we see this especially when in a couple of situations, sometimes families are plain toxic, and that's not a good thing for that individual. Other times, when people have paranoia and other things where their illness has really taken hold, they don't want to share with anybody. They're really uncomfortable doing that because of their stuff. Sometimes they just can't speak for themselves. They're just not in a position to. And if even though normally you may not want anybody to know, if you can't speak for yourself, staff may reach out to other people that you know, so that they can get information to help you. If you're a family member and in a crisis, your loved one may put you on, but if it's involuntary, likely you won't be put on any HIPAA release. But even though you may not be on a HIPAA release, you might get a call, and that may sound really strange. And it's like, they're not supposed to share information. Why are they calling you? Well, usually what happens is if there's a crisis, they are, through HIPAA, they have the permission to find out information, in the initial phases to help the individual. They can do that. What happens and what families are surprised at is you might get an initial call, maybe even more than one, but then everybody clams up on you and you're going, well, wait a minute. They called me, they wanted all this information. I gave them, why can't I get information? Well, a lot of times what's happened in that situation is there's not been a release signed by your loved one. And they got what they needed in a crisis. They feel like they've gotten some stabilization. And so now they're not allowed to call you anymore. It's not as necessary. So they really are not allowed to call you anymore. Now, what you can do as a family member, if you have concerns, is you can ask, could you please get a message to my loved one and ask them if they might sign a HIPAA release for me? And if they come back and say no, then that's the way that is. But if they say yes, then it might allow you to communicate a little more. So thank you. Next slide, please. Hospitals, who to call. If you are a family member and if you're the person with lived experience, social workers are the best people to call to share information with and to get information if you have HIPAA rights or a conservatorship. The nurses and docs are going to be pretty darn busy. Psychiatrists are, we have a critical shortage. So it's going to be rare when you can get a hold of a psychiatrist. And I got to say, if you have a psychiatrist that is calling you, if there's a release of information and a psychiatrist calls you to give you information, wow, hang on to that one, because that is somebody going above and beyond. That's hard for them to do. They rarely have the time to do that. So that's, and social workers, get used to working with social workers because they're the guys that are going to be involved with the discharge. If somebody is, say, come into Vanderbilt and they're going to, they've come into the ER and there's no beds at Vanderbilt, or they don't have the insurance or whatever the case may be, and your loved one is going to be going to MTMHI or another facility, a lot of times that's going to be the social worker doing that. So, and social workers, if it's the VA has a, in their emergency room, there's an emergency room social worker. So, ask about that. If you're in a crisis, ask about the social worker. Can you talk to a social worker? Because they're often very on top of things, and they're both on the inside and the outside. And so they can be really helpful. And I'm going to stop here and say, any questions?
Well, is this information available somewhere where I can refer back to it? Because my memory is not the best.
And Margie, I'm planning, we'll send this to all of you guys.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we'll send it to everybody. Now, I don't expect you to remember all this.
Oh, good.
Especially with the crisis we can all be in. Yeah, we don't do that to our people.
Okay, good.
We know better. It's too much. Next slide, please. Attitude check. It's important, guys. I know there's a lot going on. I know you're worried about your loved one. I know you're frustrated yourself if you're in the middle of stuff. I know you can be really frustrated with systems, and chances are the staff might be too. But just, it's so important to be respectful, be kind, but be firm. Not asking you to back off. I'm not asking you, if you see something that just isn't right, to just ignore it. But I am asking you to to be considerate, and that'll be remembered. That will be remembered. Can we go back to a little bit?
Yeah, it clicked by mistake. My bad.
That's okay. Take notes, always take notes. Who you talked to, what you talked about, when, what's the best way to reach that person? Is there another person you should reach? And then the other thing is, if you're not getting anywhere with anybody, and even if you are, you can ask for the patient advocate for that particular facility. Usually talking hospitals here. I don't think we have anybody set up that way on the jail. Um, but and there is somebody we're going to talk about later who is an advocate in the jail. But you can ask for a patient advocate. Last month, I think it was, there was a gentleman that called me, and he was calling from within the hospital and did not feel he was being treated well. And so I was able to reach out to that hospital's patient advocate and ask them to pay a visit to his room, and they did quite quickly. So, so that is something. Thanks, Don. Next one. All right. Early discharge and insurance issues. We see this sometimes a little too much, and then there's certain hospitals I see it a little too much. So we've had this before where you get concerned because you've talked to your loved one, or it might be you. I mean, maybe you went in with suicidal feelings and you're still feeling super rocky and not safe about yourself. And if you're feeling that way about somebody that you love, argue the discharge. Give them a hard time, nicely, but turn around and go, no, it's too soon. And if you have a history and you know this, either about yourself or about your loved one, turn around and say, no, I think we need some more time. I have some really good NAMI mommies out there. And one of them was a NAMI daughter. It was her mom, her elderly mom that had a history of she had condition that lifelong. She was really good at going, no, we're not taking her home. She's not ready. No, we've been here before. And you've had her twice before, and you should know this is too early. And she was just great. And she, it's expensive. Hospital stays are expensive. But no, they've got it. She's gotten it extended. So I'm not going to say, it's going to be for a real long time, but it might give you a couple more days to get some things in place, or, things like that. Call and talk with a social worker. And if you're not being heard, go up the ladder to the administrative staff. Let them know you have concerns, I've done this with people. If they're telling you you're not insured and you're thinking, but I thought surely this was good. And this is especially the Tennessee State Health Insurance Plan, Tennessee SHIP. You've got their, a toll-free number there. You can call and ask them, what's the standard, especially if it's Medicare, they'll handle Medicare. What's the standard? What are my rights with insurance? I've called them a few times, and we've actually had them come out to speak to our groups. They're pretty good. Again, you're going to contact the hospital patient advocate. Different issue this time. You might want to give them, contact them. And then, contact your own insurance company. And then if you're not getting anywhere and you're really having a hard time, you can call the Tennessee Department of Mental Health. They have a consumer helpline. Now sometimes what they're going to do is they're going to take all the information, then call me and say, Robin, would you help this person? We actually, we've got a good relationship with them. We know some of the people there personally. And so we go back and forth. Sometimes they're calling me, sometimes I'm calling them. But we go back and forth. And I have to say, I've just realized that throughout the pandemic, I don't think I called them once. And I think I might have had one call from them. So everybody was taking care of everybody. Worst comes to worst, when you have private health insurance, you can call the insurance commissioner's office. And a good time, a time when you're going to do this is what we call insurance parity. And insurance parity is when you have private insurance and they are supposed to, if they're offering, mental health provisions in their insurance, they're supposed to be doing it at an in equity with what they do for their physical health. It used to be they would cap mental health services and say only so many days a year, but you would your physical health would you'd have a lot more days, or you'd have a higher deductible, or your different things. Now it's not supposed to be that way anymore. And so, that would be when you would call the insurance commissioner's office and go, I think I have a parity issue. And so, that's something to think about there. Next, arrest. Now, this is not an uncommon thing in our bailiwick. I mean, we have a lot of folks that have been under arrest, because of their stuff, and so we find so much related to the with the jail relates to the charges, and with this particular thing, the more serious charges related to felonies can be harder to deal with. um, and if you are somebody that ends up getting arrested, or your loved one does, and you've got a felony, charges right off the bat, don't don't get too excited. Um, Sometimes it can make advocacy more difficult, but we'll get into what the role of the public defender and things like that. So, the other thing I'm going to tell you is where the crime, was committed, and the jurisdiction of, whichever, court system it is, makes a big difference. If you get arrested here in Davidson County, you're you're in pretty darn good shape, the best shape in the state. I'm working with someone who has a loved one. I'm working with a woman from Michigan with a son in Giles County in Pulaski, and with some very serious charges. And it can be difficult to navigate. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. If you'll go to the next slide there, Don, please. So public defenders can make a lot of difference if you're arrested. Now, some people have the means to afford a private attorney. That can be very helpful too, but I am just going to talk about public defenders right now. It may be a few days before a public defender is assigned after an arrest. So it may take a while for them to get involved. The way they assign a public defender and when they assign a public defender differs from county to county. I was helping somebody in January that had a case in Murfreesboro. I had to learn that system. That was me learning advocacy, taking a lot of notes and understanding how things work down there and how much differently they work than Davidson County. And so, so that was kind of interesting. And public defenders are often really overloaded, and their knowledge varies, because you may get somebody that's been with that system quite a long time and is very knowledgeable. You may get somebody that's brand new and maybe not as knowledgeable. But if they're impassioned and really looking forward to helping, they could. It doesn't matter that they're not experienced. They're gonna they'll try to give you their best to do things. But the public defender is going to know how that system works. And so you'll need to call on that person. Some public defenders will be there for families. Some of them, won't. And it depends on what you or as somebody that with lived experience, whether or not you want family involved. But but you want to let that public defender know about the mental health issues, and especially if they're already documented. That's very important, because remember we were just talking about felonies. If you've got felonies, a public defender can get those knocked down and might knock them down in misdemeanors. So that makes a big difference. And the reason that can make a big difference is that they can ask for an evaluation for a mental health court liaison. If you end up in mental health court, which really and truly is case management, it's an assisted case management. If you get arrested and you qualify for mental health court, the reason you will not qualify for mental health court is if you had serious felonies. They do not handle that. And you have to be voluntary going into mental health court. But they will help you with transportation. They will help you with often jobs. They will help you with therapy. I mean, there's a mental health court is basically a case management system to get you back on the road. And if you follow through with mental health court case management, very often, most of the time, you get all your charges expunged. So it's very, very worthwhile. Now a lot of times it'll take longer. I've had people say to me, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna serve my time and get out of here. Well, that's fine, but then you're left when you try to get housing and jobs, you're left with this thing. And so your best way to go is try to get everything expunged. And more, there are groups popping up to help pay for that expungement. Because what we have found is people have done everything they can to, follow through with the system, and then they can't pay for the expungement. So now we're seeing groups come forward that are trying to help with that. Next one, please. And if you have somebody that is in the jail system, you want to make sure they're flagged. Now, in Davidson County, that's the word we used, flagged. In other counties, they may have another name to denote that somebody has a mental health condition. But if there's a documented history of a mental health issue, let the jail know and have them flag the inmate. They might be willing then to start medication, and the jail has a limited formulary, so it may not be what you or your loved one has been on before, but it could be something. If you're having chances are, if you're in jail, it's because your symptoms have gotten out of control. Well, then this may help as far as getting some help in the jail. If you're in Davidson County, again, if you get arrested in Davidson County and you've got a document mental health issue and you're flagged, they have a special 32-bed section of that new jail that is just for people with mental health and co-occurring addiction conditions. And so they are treatment oriented. And I love what they're doing there. If you're not sure, or if you want to find out how to, if your loved one is in jail, you can do an inmate search. You can go to, I've got a website on here. And like I said, we will share this PowerPoint with you. But you can, in Davidson County, you can do this inmate lookup. I think it's pretty much in all counties. And then for Davidson County, I've given you the number to the sheriff's department, so you can make an inquiry if you don't have the computer. So I'm going to stop here and ask, do we have any questions?
Can you please repeat the information of the best way of documenting, verifying a mental illness?
Well, documented mental illness means that you have a history with a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a psychotherapist, but that you have
history with a psychiatrist,
a psychotherapist, or a psychologist, that you have been treated. You can prove that you have been treated for a mental health condition.
So if you've been treated for serious and persistent mental illness and what happens if you document, like,
And so what you would do,
you document mental illness, and they'll be more lenient, I guess you'd say.
maybe, but it's good for them to know. It's very good for them to know.
So document any mental illness. Does that include like a history with a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a therapist?
All you have to do is let them know that you're currently under treatment, and you can give them the name of the individual.
Under. So if I indicate if I'm currently under treatment.
Under treatment, and then you're able to produce the name of, somebody, a professional that's working with you that can further give information if you so choose them to have it.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
What about a care manager? Can a care manager document that, like a social worker, care manager,
If you have someone that is in the mental health system that is working with you, that is proof that you are, and if you've got a care manager or a case manager or a social worker that is working with you, that if they're working with you because you have you've been identified as having a mental health condition, then that would probably be okay too.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to go to the next slide. Criminal Justice Behavioral Health Liaison. The Tennessee legislature just approved in their budget. We're trying to make sure that we have a criminal justice liaison for every county, that there is a representation in every county, not just the big counties. And so in the case that I was dealing with this past week, I didn't know who the criminal justice behavioral health liaison was for that jail system. Now, I know in Davidson County that the mental health cooperative holds that contract. That's who holds the contract for any Davidson County jails. And I'm sure they also hold them for others. Centerstone holds some contracts, and they turned out to be the one I needed to work with. So Centerstone holds some contracts, Volunteer Behavioral Health, and I'm sure there's other entities that may be responsible for behavioral health liaison in the jails. So it's the Criminal Justice Behavioral Health Liaison will check on the person in the jail. If you've got somebody flagged with a mental health condition, this may be the person that goes to check on them. And they're somebody that's going to they've got a mental health degree. They're a mental health professional. And so, they're working within the jail. And so, and they may work jointly with the public defender. And in this case that I was working on, I mentioned the name of the public defender, and the person said, "Oh yeah, okay, I know who that is. Don't worry, you can drop it. I'll call him." And so that was great. And I haven't heard anything else, but I know it takes time. And that's the other thing, guys. You've got to allow for a little time. None of this moves immediately. You have to allow a little time. There are court dates. Sometimes you have to have it, depending on the system. You might have to have a hearing before in one system, the public defender doesn't get assigned until the hearing. In another system, it'll be before. So it depends. And sometimes you've got to wait for that court date to be set. So things do take time, and in the meantime, you're worried about somebody you care about that is in jail. And that's tough. But a lot of times they will work jointly with a public defender. So next slide, please. NAMI Davidson County intervention. Now, what I will usually try to do is I will try to give you suggestions. I will always try for you to go ahead and make the attempt for advocacy. I want you to do that on behalf of yourself or your loved one. I think it's very important that they respond to you. And I'm going to call Flo out because I know she is the chair. Are you still the chair, Flo, for Vanderbilt, for the Family Advisory Council?
Yes.
Okay. Could you tell them a little bit? It'd be better coming from you than from me as far as how they can use that in an advisory role, an advocacy role.
Use the liaison.
The council, with the benefit of the council, what that gives you in terms of the family council, in terms of being able to have knowledge for advocacy. Because I think you guys have been very active in helping to craft policies and
I don't think on an individual basis. I think most all of our policies are hospital-wide staff staff patient policies. There may be a department or a person they can go to, and I don't know who that would be, but I'm sure.
Well, they actually think it's the hospital advocate, but in Vanderbilt and in other hospitals, you may have a group such as the one Flo belongs to that are in there, even though you might not go to them for individual advocacy. They have been working to get policies that are cognizant and thoughtful in the way that they react to families, and they develop those policies because they have input from people like Flo and the other individuals that serve on those committees. Would that be appropriate, Flo?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So that's one of those things where we do beforehand, but I'm always going to try to get you, I'm going to give you tips, this is what you do. If after attempts, if there's still, an issue, that as an agency, I'll step in, but I don't want to step in heavy-handed with, putting my agency foot in the door until I know, I can turn around and say, listen, I know this family or this individual has come to you and they've tried this, this, and this. And I'm not going to say where this was, but I had an issue of a hospital that I had calls from 3 families in 3 weeks with people getting released early with suicidal ideation. And I tried to work with the families. I tried to get, them to work with the hospital. But after I could see it was a pattern, I stepped in and called that hospital. And I don't necessarily talk to a social worker or a nurse. I talk to admissions. I talk to marketing because I'm NAMI and I might refer somebody that way. And I'm certainly not going to want to do that if I have concerns about the hospital. And I asked, what do you do in this situation? Can you, give me, and sometimes I always hear both sides, because sometimes people, when they're upset, I'm hearing one side, but then I listen to the hospital too, and what they may have tried to do and what they were doing. And sometimes, guys, there are limits and boundaries in systems. Sometimes they're doing all they can do. It's not only that they're doing what they're required to do, but sometimes there just isn't anything more for them to do. And I think one of the most frustrating situations is when somebody goes to the hospital when they're sick. They might even be involuntary, and they refuse to take medication. They refuse treatment. They refuse treatment over and over and over. And the hospital is not, is not going to thrust that upon them. They generally are not going to do that. And so they'll be released, and they may not be feeling any better than when they went in because they have not participated in treatment. That's not a hospital issue. That's not the hospital. And it's difficult on everybody, including the staff at the hospital, because they want to do what they can to get this person into a state of wellness. That's what they're there for. That's what they work towards. So that can be tough. But I am talking in this situation, I'm talking about when there isn't responsiveness. And so one of the things I can tell you is the health department, even if it's a mental health hospital, the licensure for the hospital and accreditation usually comes through the health department. And so, if I have to, I might go up to the health department and say, I have an issue. I've got a concern here. And I can, share that. I can tell you, in 9 years that I've been doing this, I've had that happen once. Most of the time, if I call the hospital, because of the relationships that have been developed, and I even call, and even if it's the sheriff's department with the jail, most of the time, I'll say I have my advocacy hat on and I'm getting a response. And or sometimes I'm told, Robin, we don't have that drug on our formulary. Oh, that person's already, we found placement. It can be, a number of things. So for the most part, I see that the staff in the different hospitals, including MTMHI, they're trying. They're trying. It's tough. It's tough on everybody. But sometimes if you need to advocate, I want you to. It's important that you do that. So that's about it for me. What other questions might you guys have?
Do you have a copy of your speech?
Margaret will print you one, and Don can mail it to you. Sound good?
Great, thank you.
Okay.
And you're so intelligent. You speak at such a high level. I couldn't write down. I'm in the process of trying to write down the highlights what you said.
Okay.
You speak at a very high level. You speak very well, though. You speak really well.
The other thing I want to say is, as we always say here, you may not want to ask a question in front of a group of people. Thank you, Don. You may not want to do that in front of everybody else. So, our number is down below. It's 615-891-4724. That's 615-891-4724. And my personal email address is R as in Robin, R Nobling as in no jewelry, NOBLING at NAMIDavidson.org. So if you have any questions, please let me know. And my last note to you all was to document. It's just really, remember to write down everything. I learned this years ago, 20 years ago. My sister was in Florida in McClenny, the Regional Mental Health Institute there, 3.5 hours from home, and 750 bed hospital. And the head of that hospital, well, my mother has a Brooklyn accent, but I taught my mother how to document. And so my mom got to be, he'd pick up that phone and go, he'd hear her hello and hear her voice and he'd go, hi, Mom, how we doing? But Jody was in there for 13 years. So we had a lot of conversations. We had some really, really good people and a couple of not so good, but the good people far outweighed the bad. So, all right. Okay, guys, if you don't have any more questions or comments, then we're going to let everybody, off the hook tonight. And certainly would like to know if you'd like to send an email, whether or not this has been helpful. It's always nice for us to be able to know that, and what particularly, so that we can help other people along the way.
Thank you, Rob.